Fletcher Harper, our friend from GreenFaith International, who in fact we've known of GreenFaith for a while, um, but we just met. Fletcher, maybe a month ago, maybe. Time flies. It could have been 3 months. I have no idea. Uh, but we had a lovely conversation. It was really sparky, and the alignment or intersection or adjacency, whatever the word might be, of our organizations, just felt really natural. And so we're delighted that you're willing to give us some of your valuable time. We know how busy you are today and talk about your organization as you will. So I'm going to mute myself, Fletcher, and hand you the talking stick and let you take over. And everyone will be here from the beginning. We can be here up to 90 minutes if we like, and we'll be sure to leave time for question and answer. Um, so make notes if you will, and it's a nice small group, so we can see everybody. And if you're inclined to turn your video on, it makes it more intimate that way. If you're comfortable with that, and it's okay if not. So, Fletcher, with that, why don't you go ahead and take the lead here?
Great. No, thanks for the invitation, and it's good to see some familiar faces. Good to see you, Grant and Michael, and as well as Jeff. And since we're a nice number like this, I wonder would folks mind if we did a round of introduction just briefly? Would be great to hear because I'd really like to do this more interactively. I mean, nobody really needs to get talked at for extended periods of time these days. So I'd love to hear where each of you are from and how you're
I
at the table.
love that, Fletcher. It's a great idea, and these things always stall if we rely on one another to call on the next person. Do you mind calling on people? Just
Well, why don't Grant and Michael get us started since I know them, and
good.
and Sam also, and um, can get the ball rolling that way.
All right, Fletcher, good to see you. I guess the last time was maybe 4 years ago at Har Shalom. So I'm currently blessed in my state of retirement to be able to spend most of winter in Key West, which is where I am now. And spent a lovely morning playing bocce, and now looking forward to visiting on this. I just, some of you know this, but many of you don't. I have been spending last 8 or 9 years on climate in DC, walking the right side of the aisle. I was just up there yesterday and spent time with 5 representatives of the House and 1 senator. Every one of them recognizes the need for the party, as in the Republican Party, to step into this and engage in a way. And they all use the term bipartisan a number of times. So there's hope. It's way too late and, whatever, but today's the first day of the rest of our lives, isn't it? So anyway, happy to be here. Good to see everybody. And home for me when I'm not in Key West is Boulder. Thank you. Michael?
Yes, good morning. Good to see you again, Fletcher. And I must say that I'm acquainted in some way with everyone here except for maybe Grant and Ruth. And Fletcher, let me say that a few people here have already participated in that individual divestment program that we are workshop that we have, align your money with your values. But just to say that I am in upstate New York alongside the Hudson Valley. And I am very active in the Rivers and Mountains GreenFaith Circle. I'm also a student of the Zen Peacemaker Order, and it's a privilege to be here. Let me call on Barb next.
Thanks, Michael. I'm Barb Carey, and I live in Olympia, Washington, and I'm relatively new to the GreenFaith group, but very enthusiastic and trying to get something going here in the South Puget Sound area. I'm also a member of the Three Treasures Sangha of the Pacific Northwest, which is a branch of the Kyodan, I forget how to say it. Anyway, we're related to the Zen Peacemakers somehow, and appreciate all the good works that you folks have done over the years. And I feel very privileged to be here as a kind of a newbie in this world. I was a hydrogeologist in my career and I'm retired now. So it's nice to be doing non-technical work that hopefully makes a bigger difference than the technical work. So thank you. Should I call on someone? Okay, another Barbara Spink.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I used to do science and it's so nice not to have all that technical minutia to worry about, but I got my booster yesterday, so I look and feel like death warmed over. But I'm from Albany, the Capital Region Interfaith Creation Care Coalition.
Great. And I wonder maybe if Sam goes next and then Kathleen and then Ruth.
Sure. Thank you, Fletcher. Very nice to actually meet you. I know we exchanged some emails. And my name is Sam Randall, or in the Zen communities, most people know me as Sokyo. And nice to be with you all today. And Grant. And we brought. I'm part of the GreenFaith Boulder County Circle and on the organizing committee there. And actually, we brought in Michael Richardson recently to lead one of the Aligning Your Money with Your Values workshops with our circle, and can highly vouch for what he's doing, and thank you. It's nice to have that connection. And I also recently joined the board of Zen Peacemakers, and I'm really happy and excited to see the continued growth of peacemaking efforts related to climate and environment. And this feels like yet another step forward in that, and exploring relationship with GreenFaith as well. So very happy to be here. And hi, Ruth. Very nice to see you again. I think you said Kathleen next.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I heard that was what Fletcher suggested. Okay, so I'll take over. Thank you, Sam. Yes, I'm Kathleen, and good evening from Germany over here on this old continent. So I'm studying with the Zen Peacemakers for a couple of years now, and I'm happy to be connected with Grant and also Jeff in the effort to also give the climate issue and environmental issues a good space within the Zen Peacemaker community. So we just created also a room for Eco Dharma, Eco Sattva, sharing and meeting point. And I did a couple of events with David Loy, so I'm a bit in touch with him and the Eco Dharma work that he does. He will be in Germany in a couple of weeks here, and we'll have an event here with him. So I'm part of the green movement here in Germany since the 1980s, and never joined the Green Party, who has a hard time ruling our country these days. So I try to combine my care for the earth with my spiritual practice. And I'm happy to meet you. It was a Dharma sister from Switzerland who got me in touch with the GreenFaith movement, but I haven't noticed before. So I'm happy to meet you now, get to know you. Thank you. So, and it's Ruth now, right? Hi, Ruth. We met on the Eco Sattva Council the other day, right?
Oh, yeah. So it's nice to meet everyone here who I haven't met. I'm Ruth, and I live in San Diego, California, ancestral lands of the Kumeyaay, but I'm currently in Boulder, Colorado. I'm here for 4 months on a Lens Fellowship at Naropa University, working on a project, Walking with Trees. I've been walking with dying trees for the last decade. It's a huge problem in California. And I'm now working on the project in Boulder, and more broadly working on how Buddhist practice can help work with environmental grief and resilience. So while I was here, I met Sam, thank you, who put me in touch with peacemakers, because the work I'm doing is bearing witness is so congruous. and was also on a call with Fletcher about organizing these meetings. So I'm really glad to be here today. I should also say that my affiliation is mostly with the Shambhala community, and we have a group touching the earth that particularly deals with environmental issues, and also through that are working with GreenFaith.
Right. I think,
And who?
Laurie, I'm guessing that
Yeah.
that might be your first name, but
It's
I'm not
Larry.
100% sure.
Yeah, it's
That's
Larry.
great.
Larry. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. My name's Larry Greenleaf. I recently retired after 33 years in financial services, all in technology. But now I'm sort of looking for opportunities to maybe do some other things relative to socially responsible investing, some things relative to climate change. With a name like Greenleaf, I feel a certain degree of pressure to try to live up to that name. You have Michael to blame for my presence here today. I actually attended one of his workshops as well. So you can thank him or berate him later, depending upon how much I stir things up here this afternoon.
Great. Jeff, is it right to expect that everybody knows you, or should you do a quick intro also?
I think I know most everybody, but just very, very briefly, I live northwest of Boulder, Colorado, up above 7,000 feet, on 5 acres that was Arapaho land and some of the other local tribes previously. And I really resonate with, someone mentioned dying trees. We've been on this land 22 years and we've lost probably 80 trees in that time, having most to do with mistletoe and bark beetle as a result of warming temperatures over the years. It needs to get cold enough for long enough every winter to kill those beetles. Or else they'll eat your trees from the inside out. And so we've had to cut down and take out that many trees over time. So, but we share our land with foxes and black bears and cats that we get to see very, very rarely. We know they're there. It's like being in a city and you know somebody's following you. When we go outside the house, you can't see them, but you know they're there. And all manner of smaller animals up here as well. And happily, none of our neighbors put up fences. So, and most of the property here is, larger property like this. And so all of those animals get to roam unimpeded, which is a nice agreement that we have among us, unspoken agreement among us up here in the hills. So, nice to see everybody. Thank you all for coming. This should be really wonderful today. Thanks, Fletcher.
Great. Thanks. It's really good to connect. And what I thought I would do would be to do a little bit of how our work at GreenFaith has evolved over the years, and then share our sense of where things stand currently. Not so much with climate change, which we all know is not good, but in terms of religious responses, religious and spiritual responses that we're seeing, and where we stand on that. And I'd love to make this more of a back and forth. So feel free to introduce, and I'll talk for 10 minutes at the most now, and then would like to go back and forth if that sounds good. We got started 30 years ago, actually, as an all-volunteer organization in the state of New Jersey, because Christian and Jewish colleagues went to the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, and they had, what they considered to be a religious experience. They went and heard about what was happening to the planet and had this awakening in the midst of a global UN meeting that there had to be a religious response. And at that point in time, there was, sort of, as we say in the US, a big nothing burger in terms of religious action on climate change and the environment. I mean, apart from just a few theologians, very, very little, nothing organized. They got started by organizing educational sessions where they would say, here's what the Bible teaches about the environment, and so forth. And sort of limped along for a while because it was just difficult to get people to understand the connection. And you know, in this crowd, I can use this analogy. It was a little bit like if you said, you know, religion and the environment, it was like a koan, right? I mean, people would stare as if it was a deep mystery that needed to be contemplated on for days before anybody understood what the connection was. That's really different now, thank God, but it wasn't the case back then. And so the group actually was very close to going out of existence because it was a difficult thing to get feedback and get engagement. And I'd become involved as a volunteer and was looking for an opportunity to take my work into a new direction. And like a whole lot of people, early in my life, my strongest experiences of God had happened outdoors. And this is utterly common. You know, there's social science research that backs it up. And interestingly, we did several hundred interviews of people from different religious backgrounds about their outdoor spiritual experiences. And you realize these experiences are everywhere. And we actually even got contacted, and this theme will resurface later and when I talk, by a number of atheists who were upset that we weren't interviewing atheists about their spiritual experiences outdoors, which I think to me is it's a sign that what this is about is a lot bigger than our systems of meaning often know how to contain and hold. So I, along with some other colleagues and friends, got involved. We started doing work in New Jersey, continuing with the education, helping religious facilities green up the way they operate, helping individuals adopt sustainable lifestyles. What really caught our attention, was we did what we called toxic tours, where we would take people working with local activist groups to Newark, New Jersey, which is a city that's scarred by the wounds of post-industrialism, massive numbers of contaminated sites, terrible air quality. 1 out of every 3 or 4 people has asthma. And what we found is that when religious people actually saw and felt, even just for an afternoon, immersed in this reality, that was what woke them up. That was what really got under people's skins. And it became a sort of one of the things that we did. We did dozens of those tours over the years, precisely because we found that was what got people to wake up. And what we realized by doing those tours, as we built out our education and training programs, and was that the cause, when you think about what's the root cause, you know, there are always a lot of ways to address that, but we became more and more convinced that the root cause behind these threats are governments that are at best ineffective, and at worst absolutely captured by major industries that don't want to change their ways of treating the planet and treating people's health. That the problem is industries themselves, particularly with climate change, the fossil fuel sector. You know, Larry, I think you'll sort of resonate with the fact that the finance sector has been getting more and more heat over the last several years, rightly so, because they continue to bankroll the expansion of fossil fuels and deforestation at the exact time when that needs to shrink. And then when we dug deeper, we also realized within the religious sector and the cultural sector that there's a very powerful religious sort of force, anywhere from 15 to 25 to 30% of the religious population in any given country that adheres to a more fundamentalist style of religion. And that's true whether it's Christian or Muslim or Hindu or Jewish or Buddhist. But what we saw when we looked internationally, whether it was in Brazil or in India or in different, is that kind of right-wing expression of religion and culture was absolutely in bed with extractive industries and a destructive attitude towards the planet. So we started, a number of years ago saying, this is, for religious people, we've got skin in the game because religion's being used very actively to promote mindsets that are destructive to the planet. I mean, I'm Christian. The Christian world has done a huge amount of Christian evangelicals in Brazil control the government there and are the driving force behind the destruction of the Amazon. Not on their own, but they're leading the way. The fundamentalist evangelical white Christian movement here in the United States has long provided a moral and cultural home for extractive industry interests. So we, that sort of gave birth to our analysis. And over the years, we got involved in the fossil fuel divestment movement very early on because we felt that it was important to start to do things as religious people that sent a really strong, unequivocal signal. And we're under no delusion or illusion that there's any one tactic that's going to win the day. I mean, everything is necessary at this stage. But we felt a particular resonance with finding ways to try to empower people from different spiritual and religious backgrounds to take really strong stands publicly. Divestment was one piece of that. Another example, back before in 2014-15, when the Paris Climate Agreement was sort of being born and momentum being built around it, we organized a lot of people of different religions to take part in the People's Climate March and various major climate mobilizations, because we believe, and the social science shows that it's clear, that if you want to get major political change, that you've got to turn out large numbers of people peacefully. That's how big change happens. And it's not surprising to me that after the People's Climate March in New York in 2014 turned out, almost 500,000 people, that was a big shot in the arm of the momentum towards the Paris Agreement. And this is again where the atheist thing came back. We had 30 different religious and spiritual tables for the march, each organizing their own community. So we had a Buddhist table and a Baha'i table and a Catholic table and a Muslim table and so on. And here again, 3 weeks before the march, I got a phone call from the biggest atheist association in the United States, furious that we didn't have an atheist table. So it's like, we didn't know you wanted to be part of this group. So we created an atheist table, put them on the website. In the drop-down menu, atheist begins with A. So it was the first thing that everybody saw when they came to the faith table. But it's this sort of signal that there's something very fundamental that's at work here in terms of the re-envisioning of our place in this world, and that deep reflection is part of what religious communities need to support and foster actively and without apology. In recent years, we've become more concerned and more convinced than ever that religious groups, among many different things that they do, absolutely must be regularly helping organize and take part in nonviolent civil disobedience and in different forms of peaceful direct action. Because, and again, I think that's partly because that just is in our DNA. We also think that the place that we are now is literally an expression of insanity. The fact that we've known for so long about the problems that we face, and it would be one thing if these problems had no apparent solution, but that's not the case. We've known for decades that the solution is to wind down fossil fuels, scale up renewables, reduce deforestation, protect indigenous rights, make sure that government policies and private finance and public finance are guiding that transition. But every single step of the way, it's been an absolute pitched battle to get even the most modest of changes. It took until just a couple of years ago until most of the world's major development banks agreed to stop financing new coal and oil and gas projects. And some of them are still doing it because they've had money in the pipeline for years. So we think that, we all know, I don't need to tell you all this, the time is more than out. We're not running out of time. We've run out of time in terms of any simple, painless solution to the problem. Religious groups need to be upfront about that and need to say, look, we're facing a really bad situation and it needs to turn around really fast. And there is no moral argument about that. There can be discussions about how, sure, but the reality is that governments around the world should no longer be permitting new fossil fuel projects, period. They shouldn't be allowing more deforestation, period. The finance world should not be financing those types of projects anymore, period. And we understand that that's hard. And some people may think, oh, that's just sort of activist, lack of connection with reality. Yesterday, the UN Secretary General made a remark that was interesting, saying that, he'd heard environmental activists called extremists over the years, that he actually had come to believe that the extremists were people who felt that we could continue along with business as usual or a moderate rate of change. So that's where we're at. We're gearing up. Our next global faith action is going to be this October. We're settling in on the exact dates. It'll be worldwide. We'll be inviting people to take part in actions to help make it really clear in the media, as well as in our sanghas and our mosques, our temples and our churches, that folks have to decide where they stand on this issue, and that we owe that to our kids, and that we owe that to this incredible planet that we're all so fortunate to live on. And this is where, I'll sort of wrap up momentarily. This is where I'd, encourage or invite some feedback from you good Buddhists, because I know that anger is sort of a no-fly zone in Buddhism, but I don't know, I don't know how one reckons with this at a moral and spiritual level without dealing with a profound level of anger, of disappointment, of despair, as almost the price of admission for jumping into this movement. So let me wrap up there. Let's go back and forth. You've got the gist of what I'm saying, I think, by now. So I'd love just to have an open conversation and to hear what you all think. And Ruth, I see Ruth and Barbara's hands up in the Zoom. Go for it, Ruth.
Actually, Barbara's had her hand up much longer than
Okay.
I, so let's start with Barbara.
Thank you, Ruth. When you were talking about the cause, I read a book on this particular idea, and I don't remember the author, so I can't credit the author. But basically what he was saying is that every single religion and including atheists, we all hold a belief in common that we're so used to believing we don't even realize we believe it. And the belief is that the human species is considered to be more evolved, smarter, and superior to all other species. And that gives us a right to exploit nature. In other words, other species' life is worth less than ours. Our life is more important than any other species' life. And So we have propagated ourselves into this situation, and with the extractive greed. And, to me, that's a new spiritual message that should be put out there, that other species need to be respected for the life forms that they are. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No, I think you find within every single religion this tension between the earth honoring teachings that have been surfaced over the last 15 to 20 years that previously hadn't been addressed in relationship to contemporary circumstances, and the sort of habit of, and this is where I think culture and the economy are sort of indistinguishable on some sense from, because it's impossible to live in a developed, so-called developed country, a global north country now, without having one's life do a lot of damage to the planet. I mean, you can lessen that, but the deck is stacked. And that's why we've sort of gotten so invested on the systemic change piece of the picture, because individual action matters, but we've got to have a collective response. So I think also, Barbara, that, Indigenous, I think this is one of the reasons that there's something about many Indigenous teachings that's ringing true now, because that, I would say, is a marked difference.
Yeah, the exception. Yeah, I guess I'm talking about Western-based religions. We all think we have the right to propagate as much as we want and take as much as we want from nature. And that's a religious belief. And it also is what, humanists, which are atheists, right? They believe that too. Humanists are more important. Humans. So, I'm hoping that, things will get bad, but I'm hoping that when things get bad, you have a spiritual, awakening and an evolution. And I hope that we have a permanent evolution, spiritual evolution from the fallout of this attitude. That's the only thing that keeps me going, that if we do survive this, we will have evolved spiritually.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Well, now I want to respond first to this conversation before the comment I was going to make. I first of all, I want to just say that I really appreciate all the work that you're doing with GreenFaith. And it's the only way that we can work with the immensity of the ecological challenges is collectively. So the work you're doing is incredibly important. Secondly, one of the things I've been doing during this really sabbatical at Naropa, where I have time to do a lot of reading, is reading particularly about Eco-Dharma, but also other faith traditions, including things like Thomas Berry. And one of the things that I think your comment, Barbara, really points to is the need for examining our spiritual traditions, because we certainly need a cosmology. What everybody comes to the conclusion is that in order to make the kinds of social and economic changes, we also need to make spiritual changes. And those spiritual changes need to include a recognition of a lack of separation between humans and humans and humans and non-humans, that we're all part of a larger living being. And also looking at not just kind of individual salvation, this is one of the points that David Loy makes, which is part of all of what he calls the axial traditions, but at a more communal salvation. So that's all one thing. It's a long discussion, which I could say much more about, and is hard to do, but I think it's important that it's part of, I mean, it's hard to say briefly, but it's important that it's part of a discussion among faith groups. The other thing that I was going to respond to more specifically was, Fletcher, your comment about Buddhists having a problem with anger. And I think it's really important to discuss that. Personally, a lot of my work is working with ecological grief, because I realize that in Western cultures, I could cite all kinds of authors, starting with Felipe Arias, who looks at mourning traditions over the last 1,000 years. And he talks about Western civilization trying to banish death. Or privatize mourning. And feeling is so essential to being human and to making the kinds of changes that we need to make, both feelings of anguish and grief and feelings of anger. And I think it's really, I know sometimes if there's anything anger, I work as an ecological artist. In what I read, people are like, oh, Buddhists can get angry. And anger there's a power in anger. So I think the problem with emotions is when we get fixated and we say, I'm right and you're wrong, without seeing the humanity in the other person, which is part of Buddhist tradition, but I think part of Judeo-Christian tradition as well, having grown up and still practicing in the Jewish tradition as well as the Buddhist tradition. So it's getting fixated with the ego of the emotion. That's the challenge. The emotion is our birthright and is an essential part of our humanness and needs to be part of our activism. It's just how we work with it. So thanks.
Yep, well said. Grant and Jeff.
Thanks again, Fletcher, for all the work you're doing. And I just wanted to comment on the anger's a no-fly zone too, in the sense that I think it's true in all of Buddhism, but certainly true in Zen. There is no fly zone, no fly zone. I mean, it's all of life, every bit of its ugliness, its beauty, every bit of it's always there. And to not recognize it and own it is part of our problem. I think, though, as Ruth said so well, what anger can be is a motivator and empowerer, as long as we feel it for what it is and don't let it take over. I think that's the thing. In terms of the cause, I know in these groups, and these groups, if I might presume, a bit leaning towards the left, it's easy to point fingers at industry and such. But what I found, which is, I'm not saying that's not true, but I think it's equally true that everyone on this page and all of our friends and family members and our neighbors don't want to pay more for energy. We want to make sure we can rely on it. We want stuff to be cheap. We want it now. We don't have any patience. We're an equal part of the problem. Those corporations that sell stuff, sell it to consumers, and the consumers are buying it for a price. So it comes back to what Ruth said. This is all part of the ecosystem, the social economic ecosystem, the sentient being system. I find it can be distractive to point a finger and blame others when it's we are the ones. We're the ones that demand this stuff, and we're the ones that can do exactly what you've been encouraging people to do. And I love getting our religious traditions engaged in this, because those are thought leaders and can help shift communities in important ways. And it's great to see the progress that you've made. But each of us owns the responsibility of citizens in our own countries to be engaged in the political arena in a respectful way, in an open, finding common ground way. That's the real practice too. And find the described enemy and engage with them in a respectful way and try to find a way to go forward. But again, we're the ones that are buying all this stuff. And when you read the surveys and polls of people who, how much more are you prepared to pay to shift to a sustainable energy, it's disturbingly low. And then we have this Ukraine situation now, which could lead to nuclear war, which of course is the ultimate solution to global warming, nuclear winter. I mean, it's really ironic, but thank you for what you're doing. And each of us need to be more engaged in all sorts of ways, not just walking the streets, but writing letters, making calls, making sure people vote, helping educate people in the political process, as well as the sort of science of global warming. And Boulder, those of us in Boulder know that we no longer have fire seasons, we have fire years. We had a massive fire in December, and we had one in March. And it's like, this is not supposed to happen, either one of those months. So it's real, it's in front of us, and people change when they feel pain. So that's it, thank you.
I mentioned the, since it's come up a couple of times, I mentioned the anger thing in a teasing way towards Buddhism, but I could have said exactly the same thing about Christianity. And the reason I mentioned it is because our experience, my experience has been that it's a fun, that recognizing one's anger or disgust with the way things are is an enormously important part of the transformation process that people go through to become publicly active. And it's a, it's, as is grief, it's a difficult emotion, in many cultures. And so I try, when I talk with Christian groups, I tease Christians about the anger no-fly zone because because I think we've got to reckon with it. It's something, because religions recognize that, you don't want to become a rage fiend. I mean, it's not good to be overtaken by these emotions, and that's the wisdom of our traditions. But sometimes that's come at the cost of sort of writing them off too much or repressing them too much. Grant, the one thing I would say, I mean, we absolutely all bear responsibility, but what I would say is that I do think that putting intense pressure on corporate and governmental leaders is necessary at this stage because of the power that they have to shape the systems that we all live in. I mean, I've purchased renewable energy for use at home for 15 years now because I can do that, the cost is very modest in terms of an additional cost. And it still is, I don't know what the figures are, but a large majority of people in New Jersey, where I live, still are not aware that that's an option that they have. And so I think and I'll sort of, to put another sort of portion of the industry piece in play, I think that the so-called creative industries, the advertising and PR agencies, need to be put on the hot seat a bit also, because they help create the cultural narratives and images that normalize the status quo. So I do think that there's a I mean, we promote individual lifestyle change because we think it's fundamental to creating a culture where we're going to get this right eventually. But we would not agree that we bear as individuals equal responsibility with the major corporate players, especially the ones who've been shown to have been behaving deceptively on purpose for decades. Is it Jeff and then Michael?
Thanks, Fletcher, and thanks everybody for your comments. This is really stimulating, and it brings up way more than I have time to comment on, so I'll try to keep it lean. After Grant, I was going to let the anger thing go by. My reaction to that is much more comic strip. That there's nothing wrong with anger. It's only when I smash the cuckoo clock with a baseball bat that it becomes a problem. It's a potent drug, so to be used sparingly and kept under control. One of the things that I think, on a more serious note, that I think we're really up against, and I really hate to ever contribute comments, and I'm about to do it, that sort of feel like the Volkswagen getting stuck in the mud. But but there are things about our civic life that are that way. And one of them is propaganda, and we're up against it here. Well, of course, we're seeing it in Russia now. It's not new. Who learned it from whom? I don't know, but the willingness and the ability for masses of people, not majorities, but large numbers of people, to believe nonsense or to believe outright lies. And when it comes to the environment, there's been a concerted effort in the United States, to get people to believe that this is just a hoax. It's liberal latte drinking nonsense, and that's a real contender. And I think it's something that we need to find a way to deal with if this really is going to be a mass movement. And I don't know what that answer is, because it's pernicious, and it's not lying down. It feels to me like it's growing. It occurs to me, and forgive my phone ringing here. We'll just ignore this. As with other progressive issues, and I don't think that actually this is a progressive issue. I think this is just a life issue. And this is just my personal opinion. I don't know that there's any basis for this, but it seems like there's two prongs of work. I would like it to be a popular movement. That's, and this happened with Vietnam. A tipping point came with Vietnam. And we're not there yet. But at the other prong really is the courts and legislation, and that's not for everybody. That's a specialized endeavor, and lawsuits and working through that, the arcane topography of the legal system and all that is such a huge challenge. So I don't want to say too much about that, but on the popular side, I really feel like, and I even hear it here among us, we have to have a language that, and I have smart neighbors, but we have to have a language that my neighbors will understand, and that regular people will understand. And I don't know necessarily, and I've been around the environmental movement since 1970, I don't know that we found that necessarily. I think we can get far afield of the kind of language that appeals to people who just want to hear something simple that they can understand. And the last thing, and sorry for a little list here, but I had a few notes. Fletcher, at some point, I'd be interested to hear. I mean, you said it so well. The prescriptions and the remedies are not mysterious. We're not solving some disease that we have no idea what to do with, and we've known for decades. I'd be interested to hear your reaction. I'm a big fan of Paul Hawken's book, Drawdown, and just any comments you might have on that. I won't say that it's definitive. I've bought 6 copies of it, and I still don't own one. I keep giving them away. So, with that, I'll mute myself and pass the talking stick. Thank you.
Great. No, I'll say something about that sort of later on. I think, Michael, I see you've got your hand up, and then Kathleen, I'm wondering, it would be great to hear your perspective, in Germany, because, great. Michael, go for it, and then we'll go to Kathleen after that.
Thank you, Fletcher. Just briefly to share what our GreenFaith Circle here in the Upper Hudson Valley is doing. We've decided as a circle to take 3 actions. One is rather basic, in which we try to bring the awareness of the disruption that is occurring and also those regenerative solutions that are available to us. So Jeff, as you talk about building a movement, that's what that is all about. How do we develop a movement by growing the awareness and all of not only the disruption, but the regenerative solutions? But then very much in sync with what GreenFaith International is doing, going after the corporate and the government aspects. And when I mean government, I'm talking about pensions in divestment. As I think many of you know, that GreenFaith is focusing on divestment for this year and probably for years to come. And so we're taking that on, and we're going to be partnering with GreenFaith, particularly Fletcher with the New York City effort with Vanguard and BlackRock. And it is to bring an attention to the moral responsibility of those corporations to move away from their investments and reinvest in renewables. And then the third aspect really gets into the individual part that we were talking about. And allow me just to share something here in the chat. Sokyo, we read this at the beginning of the workshop, and I read this at the beginning of every one of our workshops. This was sent to me some weeks ago by our dear friend Joshi Burns up in Vermont. And just to read for yourself, where it says, "May I practice peace with what I choose to purchase, donate to, and invest my financial resources in, recognizing that I am the first leverage point for peace in the systems and structures of war and aggression." Kind of sounds like critical race theory there, doesn't it? "And that I have power as a person of privilege in the global economy, and may my actions encourage others." So it's this three-prong aspect of building a movement, holding those that are doing harm accountable by using the moral compass that is pointing all of us in the right direction. And then lastly, what do we do as far as our own approach? Just in closing, most Buddhists, in fact, I have to say all Buddhists, take the 4 vows at one time, at least in the Mahayana tradition. And in that, we often say, may I, to save all sentient beings. Now that's often translated into free all sentient beings or serve all sentient beings. And we like to point out that what that really means is to serve them in such a way that you are removing them from harm. And that's our responsibility going after corporate America. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Yeah, thanks. Kathleen, over to you.
You sure you want me to go on? Would you like to have a bit of time to speak as well in between?
No, you go ahead. I mean, I'm taking some notes, but I think it's good. I think I'd go for it.
Okay. So yeah, thank you for calling me up, because of course it's working within me what I heard from you all. So the one thing is that what struck me again in what you said in the beginning, Fletcher, is the point of bringing religious people to the spot, having them meet with activists. And this of course reminds me to the bearing witness practice that we try to practice as well as peacemakers. So to go to these, you said you called it toxic tours, yeah, right? Did I get that right? So to go to places that are wounded and contaminated in this way, and to stay there and bear witness and really open to what is happening or what has happened there or what is happening there. And there are so many places like this concerning the environment and climate. So this is something that is touching and that is really motivating also, because there's such a lot to do, so much to stay with and to and I agree to what you said. That is what makes the change and the point in people, and we don't have in our hand what they do afterwards with that, not normally, and we don't want to push or to kind of manipulate that, but then the trust comes in that this experience will bring forth action that is helpful and useful and meaningful. And of course, the other thing that strikes me is when you say we have to put pressure on governments and so on. So what we tried here in Germany, or what we achieved is in the 30 years of environmental movement, is that the Green Party is in the government again, in a only for a couple of months now, and in a very difficult time. That it wasn't at all sure that they would be voted in. It was not so clear. And what I see now is that there's such a paradox in the situation, that it's not only that when the one time they were in the German government before the Green Party, the environmentalists, is that they had to cope with the Yugoslavian war in the 90s and had to decide to join this war. And now there's a war again. So for me, it's really a special thing to bear witness to the job of the Greens, of the Green movement in the German government, to have this rearmament now and to have to finance all that, obviously. And at the same time, this paradox is so heavy that they have been thinking about how to, that climate change is the very issue of this government. And of course they have the resistance that is there, that you all talked about from those who live on and have have advantages from the fossil fuel energies. And now we have this situation with the embargoes and with the question, how can we, so it might be that we step out of fossil fuels and oil and gas much faster than we thought we could achieve that by discussion and by democracy. No, maybe we achieve it by war, by the Ukrainian war. And this is just, for me, very amazing how paradox things go and how we really can't know what is the right way. This is, I'm really chewing on that and trying to understand what's going on in that way. So this interconnection of the crisis, the intermingledness of crisis and difficulties, and I wonder what that brings forth. And I see how it energizes people as well. I see how the green people in the government, how they suffer, and at the same time I see how they change and how they ripen, so to say. So I'm not full of hope, but I'm just full of decidedness, and that's what my anger brings forth as well, to be very decided and pretty clear about priorities. And I'm not yet retired, so I have to kind of deal with work, which is maybe also not so meaningful for me, and I have to just put priorities right, where to put my time in. So this is long enough that there's no questions. You're welcome. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you. And Kathleen, we have a campaigner, a person who works for GreenFaith, who's based in Karlsruhe, and who's done a couple of convenings of interested people of different religious and spiritual backgrounds in Germany. And so I'd be very glad, I know she'd love to meet you. So I'd be very glad to connect you.
That would be great. Thank you. Yeah.
You know, one thought I've got, one of the themes, not as much in what Kathleen just said, but in a couple of the previous comments, whether it was in Drawdown, Jeff, which is wonderful, is that you talked about, and Michael, the way you talked about some of the importance of solutions. One of the things that I think is very important is to understand that one avenue for solutions is sort of consumer choice. Another avenue must be jobs. We do quite a bit of work with African American faith communities, and that is the way that we've been able to get meaningful work done in those communities, is by working seriously on what does it look like to have strong policies at the county, state, national level to support job training and job readiness for the green economy, and to help people make that transition. And I think that the criticism of the environmental movement of being a sort of movement for people who are more comfortable in life is an important critique to take seriously. Not that that makes it wrong, but to recognize that if we're going to build a large enough cultural, moral, social movement, we need working people, and we need poor people to be part of that movement, and we need the movement to be good for those people. And so I think that the jobs piece is very important as part of the solution. And I think it's also important to be wary about making sure that we think carefully about the solutions that we talk about. One example, and I haven't figured out a good way to reckon with this yet, but with a lot of our partner faith communities, and we've got about 50 GreenFaith circles in different parts of Africa. And one of the activities that the congregations love doing in Africa is small tree planting events. And there's a genuine beauty to it. And I appreciate that, and I understand it. And at the same time, there are times when I want to tear my hair out, because what is needed is a movement that says to governments in Africa, stop making it easy for fossil fuel companies to come in, and instead invest in decentralized renewable energy development to serve your communities. Right now in Tanzania and Uganda, there's a proposal that's a sort of a joint Tanzanian, Ugandan, French, Chinese project called the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline. And this pipeline would be the world's largest heated crude oil pipeline, which means that the quality of the oil is not good. It's so thick, it's got to get heated in order to flow. And about 25% of Ugandans and about 35% of Tanzanians have regular access to electricity. Just about all of the oil from this pipeline would be exported, so it won't help reduce energy poverty in those countries. And the greenhouse gas emissions from the oil that travels through this pipeline when burned will actually be greater than the combined emissions of the two countries, Uganda and Tanzania. I mean, it's literally insane. And the Ugandan government is strongly supporting it and is calling environmentalists anti-development. And the Tanzanian government is a little bit more, it's less repressive. It is a little bit more open to pressure. But I sort of wrestle with this when we see our dear colleagues in Africa, going all in on the tree planting at a small scale. When we also see, and we also have really great faith folks who are doing organizing around the pipeline as well. So it's, and sometimes they're the same people. So it's complicated that way. But yeah, I think the jobs piece is important. I think another theme that's an important one for religious and spiritual communities, what we find very predictably is that when we talk to people about taking public action or different forms of public protest or demonstrations or even civil disobedience, that very understandably people are afraid about that. It feels uncomfortable. It feels dangerous. It's not consistent with the way that they have lived previously. And so we find that it's very, and yet we also find more and more people who are deeply uncomfortable with the way things are. And so that's where we try to have more and more conversations, is to say, we believe that there is real power, moral power, in principled, peaceful, public, nonviolent protest. Doesn't solve the problem overnight. It's not the only thing that matters, but it does matter. And so we'd invite you to take part. And, you know, we find that there are more and more, I think to the degree that there's some good news, it's that more and more people are really concerned and really fed up and disgusted with the lack of progress. And, you know, Grant, to your point, are uncomfortable enough that they're, you know, they're movable in a way that they weren't 3 and 4 and 5 and 10 years ago. I wonder, Barb or Larry, anything you'd like to add, or Sam, Sokyo? You're obviously dealing with some, there's plenty of us who are not shy about speaking up, and we want to make sure we hear from you all too, if you'd like.
Barb, do you want to go, or?
I think she's saying you go for it.
Okay. Well, just a few things, Fletcher. I was thinking about your comment about sort of just the number of people in the world sort of dealing out of ignorance. I think I was just thinking of a George Carlin quote. He said, "Never underestimate the power of large groups of stupid people." And I would actually, I guess I would, instead of using stupid as a little derogatory, but just uninformed. I think there's a lot of uninformed people. And to the extent that, you know, we were talking earlier about anger, and I guess from a Buddhist perspective, I would look at this as sort of causes and conditions. So if any of you have read any of Pema Chodron's work, a lot of it is about what is our internal condition that leads us to reacting to an external cause, to some stimulus, right? And anger is sort of just leads us to sort of look at what's our internal condition that leads us to responding to something external. That we often see that external cause is something that is inseparable from our condition, right? That it is the condition into itself, when it's really our internal condition that leads us to respond that way. You know, I often think of people who talk about, you know, defining happiness and happiness as being something, well, if I clean my house and my house is in order, it makes me happy. And so we sort of condition our happiness on those external factors without really understanding that it's that internal condition that we can come to realize regardless of those external factors. Those are separate things in our experience. And so I think about that on a broad scale, right? That I think that there are actually people that in a very harmful way understand broadly that they can impact people's internal conditions by leading them to believe that external causes are really no separate than their feelings. So people get angry, you know, sort of you get the right trying to convince their base that what the leftists are doing and that climate change isn't real, is to convince them that their feeling is not separate than, or that condition, right? It's not separate than the causes. So they get into that false sense of ignorance, and they do it on a broad scale. So I think to your point earlier, a lot of the messaging is very much intended to say, let's take the fear and put it on something external, or the doubt and the ignorance on something external, and not really address the internal aspects of how people are feeling, that we need to somehow affect the condition of people so that they begin to ease that solidification around what they believe is true or not true in external conditions. And then Grant was talking in terms of the economics, as those of us as consumers and the choices that we make as consumers, and sort of aligning with the work that Michael's been doing. I think there's also sort of the investment side of things. We want our cake and eat it too, right? We want to say, you know, I don't want to consume, you know, or I don't want high prices in certain things like oil companies. Yet if part of my portfolio, my investments on which I'm living on in retirement, is actually invested in companies that I don't always see clearly are invested in fossil fuel companies, but I see it if my investments go down. Right. So I want my companies to perform well that I'm invested in, but I also want to be able to manage, the consumer side of it. So, that's that whole sort of, I want my cake and eat it too, side of the equation. So that's part of what I'm trying to still struggle with. And I think about, socially responsible investing is, how do we begin to sort of shift things on a much broader scale so that we move, I read a paper recently that was focused on the difference between egonomics versus economics, and sort of the current economic models are based more on sort of material achievement and material goods, and we always want to consume more from that perspective, versus true economics, which is focused more on local community investment, more local sustainability. How do we ensure that our communities have the things that they need, without the economics being so invasive, big box stores and sort of outsourcing a lot of the things that the communities really need to be able to sustain themselves. So I'd be interested in, if anyone has additional information, books, around different economic models and how we begin to look at, really the money side. Got to chase the money and change the mindset on how things are invested financially, if we really want to be able to, I think, make a material difference.
Great. Thanks, Larry. One thing I'll say, and then Barb, I think you had something you were going to say, but I will say that of all of the religious groups or spiritual groups that I've ever spoken to, this gets the prize. It is the first time that anybody has ever referred to St. George Carlin. So I will remember that, Larry, if I remember nothing else, with a lot of appreciation. Barb, go ahead. You were going to say something, I think.
Well, I'm just feel like I'm learning so much from you folks that have been doing this for so much longer. And the opposite of the George Carlin thought too is that don't underestimate what a small group of people can do. And so that's what keeps me going at this point. There's so many different aspects of the problem, and it can be overwhelming. And our little green circle group is just trying to stay together just for our own little human dynamics. So it's just very inspiring to hear everyone's situation and the situation in Europe and Africa. It just helps me to hear what's going on in the rest of the world, so that I feel like it is important, every little bit, as Grant said, every political action, every protest, without getting overwhelmed. I think it's easy to get overwhelmed by this, but to feel that there's such a great support system with all these different groups, especially GreenFaith. I just really appreciate everybody sharing their wisdom, and I'm inspired. Thank you.
And I think you raise a really important point in that, and Sokya, we'll go to you in just a moment. I often get asked, and this is particularly in Christian gatherings, not exclusively, about where do I find hope? And I have something of an aversion to the question, because I think that without intending it, so people are asking, what can you say that will make the bad thing go away? And I don't have. I think that we are, Ruth, I think you were saying, or it may have been Grant, I can't remember, but I think I think there's a lot of devastation that's locked in right now that we cannot avoid. And the only place that I find hope and energy is working with other people on this. That's absolutely what keeps me going and gives this meaning, and even a sense of joy in the middle of all of it, is that there's a group of us that are, all over the place that are working on this together because we care. And we feel like it's the best that our spiritual or religious backgrounds have to offer. And there's a dignity and a goodness or a decency to it. So I think that what you said, Barb, is really important along those lines. Go ahead, Sokyo.
And thank you everyone for the discussion. And my experience is not in the economic side of things, but really more in the, I guess, behavioral science, if you will. So I worked for many, many years working with people in recovery from addiction. And I've shared this with Grant a little bit. And myself, I'm also in recovery and been really familiar with and have worked for many years with what we call stages of change. And there's a growing awareness, I think, within the environmental movement of how the stages of change kind of can be engaged with what we're working with. That there are some people, if we think about the addiction model, who have no idea that there's a problem. And then there are other people who are very aware that things are not going well. And at the same time, making change doesn't feel possible, or they're really clinging to the way that they've been living. So there's this real addiction. And that's where I think, Grant, what you were speaking to, what I see as a symbiosis between, if you will, the dealers who are making a bunch of money and certainly aren't going to necessarily make a change unless it becomes painful for them to do. And then the users and those of us who, all of us in the way we've been living within that westernized lifestyle. So there actually is a relationship between there. Now, where the most harm is coming from, we can certainly, I think I share Fletcher's view on, primarily it's from those who are just continue to push. But there is this relationship, and what I heard today, that's the first time I've heard about GreenFaith's efforts around jobs. What we know that helps people to make a change, number one, unfortunately, suffering is often part of that. And certainly with addiction, it sometimes takes a lot of suffering for someone to be really ready to make a change. But the other part is also addressing the other factors that are contributing to what's happening with someone's life. And so right here in Boulder, one of the biggest issues, Boulder County is right next to Weld County. Weld County has the greatest number of fracking wells in all of Colorado, something like 50,000 wells in Weld County, right next to Boulder County. And the off-gassing from those wells is affecting the air quality of both counties dramatically. So there's no boundary between air, right? But I used to work downtown right next to the farmers market, and a lot of the farmers, there are farmers who grow their food in Weld County, and got to talk with some of them. And they said, one of the biggest issues is that the families there in the communities, they had schools that are built by the oil and gas companies. So it's old school, we'll buy your community by supporting things that support you in your life. And then they're wedded to this. And even if they would like to make a change, it's a pretty painful change for them to make. So not only let go of potential jobs, because many work in the fields or work on the sites, and their communities themselves are funded. So what I love that I'm hearing with GreenFaith, and that's the first time I've heard that, Fletcher, is this diversity of approaches that actually works on it from a more systemic approach. And as a Buddhist, part of what resonates for me, where I struggle sometimes with the protest dimension, is I fully believe in the power of numbers and the power of religious spiritual presence. You see someone in their religious garb at a protest, it holds weight. So I fully support that. And my deepest vow is to be of service. How do I really enact in service to the anger and disgust that I feel, right? So anger, when it is wise, is clear. I heard someone say, I think maybe it was Kathleen, it just feels really clear and straightforward of what needs to be done, and to mobilize in those directions. I think it allows us to move our anger too. Anger wants to be moved. It's an energy. So I'm excited by what I hear and happening, and I would love to learn more and how that can be expanded in other ways. And the other piece I would share is also what I love about GreenFaith, and I think makes it unique, is that the spiritual is interwoven with the action, which supports us in holding capacity to do this work. I was talking with someone in our circle recently of like, yeah, we know, those of us who are on the other end of the stages of change, we know how bad it's going to get. How do we love our way through this? That's what I keep coming to. How do we love our way through this? That's what's going to help us to meet what's happening.
Oh, that's a great phrase. I see Kathleen and Grant, and I know Jeff, we've just got 5 minutes left, I think. So maybe pass to Kathleen and then to Kathleen and then to Grant, and then we can wrap up.
Thank you. I'll be very fast. It's just 2 short remarks on the issue of jobs and economy. It reminded me of the Fridays for Future movement, which is not basically a religious movement, but a mindful movement. And I see that these young people and this movement that started in Scandinavia with just that one person, Greta Thunberg, and they all want to work differently. So they see their job future totally different as from how we work, our generation works. So I almost don't dare to say that gives me hope, but that might bring a change to the future. And the other thing, which I already also put in the chat, is the Otto Scharmer work. Otto Scharmer from MIT, who works a lot on presencing, absencing, and he found a language to reach people in economy and management and high-level jobs. And I think that's very helpful what he does with the ecosystem work. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Yeah.
Go for it, Grant.
Yeah, just quickly, Sokio, thanks for bringing up the community dependence on oil and gas. And in my experience, it's not that the oil and gas company built a school. It's that the municipal government has funded 50, 60, 70, 80% for schools, library, police, and fire by taxes that come out of extraction. So the dependency that many of these rural communities is heavily dependent upon the continuation of that. So there's that. I mean, that's not a small thing. 2 other quick things. One is, Fletcher, I think when you touched on the challenge and the discomfort that any one individual can feel in trying to make a change like this, the beauty of what GreenFaith is doing in creating these spiritual communities is when people can come together and support their efforts, they're empowered and can feed that love that Sokio talks about back and forth, and it makes it's more fun, and they don't get burned out. And the last thing I would just say, in terms of, we can complain about our current economic system, and I know many dear friends who are absolutely convinced that we need to overthrow this economic system. It's my very strong opinion that the wise among us will use this economic system to solve the problem. It'll get us there a lot quicker than trying to blow it up. Divestiture is one way, of course, but there's many others. But thanks again for doing it. And it's so important. And I really resonate with the fact that religious leaders in their robes are so powerful at these things. So thank you.
Thanks, Grant. No, I wish more of my I've gotten in trouble at times for barking a little bit too much at Christian religious leaders for not getting out there enough. So, but I agree with you. I think it's important. Jeff, I'm going to pass back to you to wrap us up, but thanks very much. It's really, I've really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for the chance to have this time together. And thanks everybody for sharing.
Thank you, Fletcher. And before we let everybody go, I want to do one thing, but I just wanted to share a couple of resources. We're talking about economics and the environment. One of the most powerful voices on this topic is Paul Hawken. And in 2000, he wrote a book called Natural Capitalism. I could not recommend it more highly. And it is exactly what everyone's talking about, Natural Capitalism by Paul Hawken. And then 10 years later, thanks, Kathleen, I appreciate it. For some reason, I can't do 2 things at one time. 10 years later, he wrote The Ecology of Commerce, which was even better received. and both are highly, highly recommended. So with that, this is a Zen Peacemakers event, and we are grounded in the three tenets of not knowing, bearing witness, and then taking action from that. My friend Michelle refers to this as empty mind, soft heart, kindly acting. He simplified the language, and I rather like it. So before we go, we've all been up here for an hour and a half, and it's very heady and energized. Let's spend just one more minute and go back to silence, and then we'll thank Fletcher and we'll say goodbye. So if we could just share 1 minute of being still together and settle back down into the belly. Okay, thank you, everyone. As always, our best ideas and our wisest actions are always going to come from that place. So Fletcher, once again, thank you so much. This was really stimulating. I think we could have gone another 2 hours without even ordering lunch. so we really appreciate it. And thank you all for staying for the whole time, and everyone contributing wonderful thoughts, and let this work continue. So thank you all.
Take care, all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Fletcher.
Great
Thank
to
you.
see you all.
Yeah.